I have a question for you, and that is, how long is too long?
What did you say?
And now that you got your mind out of the gutter, I mean, how long is too long for a TV show? The Simpsons is 30 seasons deep, and shows like Grey's Anatomy came out when I was 12 and are still going, and I'll be pushing 30 this year.
Damn.
I'm sorry.
So it's clear that a lot of shows can continue if they want to, but that brings up the question, just because you can, does it mean you should? And this is a question I often ask myself when it comes to superhero shows. On one hand, as fans, we get really invested in this stuff, but we forget that it's just a business. And I love in the business that for TV shows, it sometimes provides long-term jobs for so many people. But on the other hand, as a fan, it's definitely a sad sight to see a show you enjoy slowly start to become a distant shell of its former self. We've had a ton of Cape series over the years, and the success has varied. Some came and went, and we collectively acted like they didn't exist. Many feel wrapped up a little too abruptly and there was more story to tell. Me personally, outside of a very small pool of exceptions, I think most superhero series should have a planned season cap. And as soon as you conceive the idea to your superhero show, you should already have possible endings in mind. If you get to that season cap and there's more story to tell, then tell it. If there's not, then end on a high note. When I first started writing this video, it honestly was just about superhero shows in general, but the longer I wrote, the more I couldn't stop thinking about The Flash, aka the hero that never grows. Like I've said on my channel before, at one point Arrow was my favorite show on TV. If Arrow was my main squeeze, then The Flash was kind of like my fun little side piece. We would hang out from time to time, but I was never super emotionally invested. Now look, that's a horrible analogy and definitely not indicative to my real life, but it definitely sums up my relationship to this show. And watching it in passing, I could definitely understand why people feel like seasons 1 through 3 are like peak superhero TV. But then one day I made a really big mistake. I started actually paying attention, and I would have to respectfully disagree. But with that being said, season 1 is pretty damn good. Although they were still trying to figure out the tone in season 1, it was pretty solid and it still holds up. The CGI was decent. They weren't trying to make these big CGI monstrosities that were very clearly out of budget. They used it in smart ways and pretty sparingly for the most part. It was also cool to see this version of Barry Allen's origin story and him figuring out his powers from the ground up. It didn't take a long time for me to take a liking to Grant Gustin in the role as the Flash, even though his personality did feel a little more Wally West than Barry Allen. Barry had his job as a CSI tech, so there was that duality there. The Team Flash was small and reasonable. It was none of that "we are the Flash" nonsense. Cisco didn't have any powers. Iris was still a journalist. It made for this cool Clark Kent and Lois Lane style relationship that made sense. But honestly, it's still a little bit weird for me that Barry and Iris were basically pseudo brother and sister. Somebody told me that that's how it was in the comics, but there was a lot of stuff that they left from the comics unadapted, and they could have left that unadapted too. I don't know what I find more weird, the fact that Bruce Timm made it in the DCAU, that Batman actually clapped Batgirl's cheeks when she went off to college, or this. Okay, that one's probably worse, but you get what I mean. Like, they both just feel like a violation. Even though season 1 had its cheesy moments, it was a unique charm to the show that I really enjoyed, and most importantly, the story was actually compelling. Sure, there was a lot of one-off villain of the week side plot episodes because, you know, CW shows, they just gotta have their 20+ episodes a season. But for the most part, the main story at hand was handled pretty precisely. The entire reason for Barry becoming a CSI tech was to clear his father's name from killing his mom, and his mom dying, ironically, is the biggest factor in him becoming the Flash. And I think that's kind of poetic. Throughout the season, even though we know that Wells is the Reverse Flash, Barry and Cisco don't know right away. I thought they were pretty successful at building tension around that aspect. It was pretty heartbreaking to see Cisco find out the truth. Wells was his mentor and a father figure. Some of the writing between those two were some of the best in the entire series, and the insecurities about that situation are what fuel a lot of Cisco's actions in future seasons. And Barry finding out about Thawne sets a few cool things in motion too. We get our first bit of time travel in this first season, which I thought would be something that they wouldn't touch until far later down the road. This was also the first time we see the trope of Barry finding out that he's going to die in the future, but it definitely won't be the last. Barry learns a lot of valuable lessons this season, one being that going back to change time is a very bad thing and you should never do it.
unconscious. Oh.
I really like how this season wrapped up too. It ended on one of the most comic booky soap opera moments ever. And again, as a comic book fan, I loved it. Old Eddie Thawne, who is Iris's current man and who the evil Thawne is a descendant of, kills himself, which inherently kills evil Thawne and erases him from the timeline. Yeah, man, season 1 was good and it still holds up today. But unfortunately, it kind of feels like they put all of their eggs in one basket. They exhausted and ran through one of the Flash's most iconic villains and storylines pretty early on. And it really feels like that left them turning their wheels for a while, trying to recreate that season 1 magic. Season 2, the beginning of the end. I like how they did the old school bait and switch, kind of like how they did with Smallville season 1, where the finale episode in season 1 wraps up in the intro episode of season 2. I thought that was cool. I also like the idea of Reverse Flash leaving a message that lets Barry's father go free. It really hones in on how much of an obsessed little fanboy that Thawne is. It kept him as a looming threat and it makes their relationship even more complex. Barry was really having trouble with his feelings toward Wells. It's like, yeah, I murdered your mom, but I also taught you how to use your powers and I gave you everything you needed to set your dad free, so we good? But with that being said, season 2 was the beginning of the end. Every single trope that would later go on to plague the show started here in season 2. So even though I do think season 2 is pretty good and enjoyable, I gotta put a little asterisk beside it. Season 2 started the trope of random person shows up, so let's make them a part of the team. The trope of, well, we don't know what to do with the character anymore, so let's give them superpowers. It was also the introduction of the multiverse, which basically became an infinite get out of consequence free card. And speaking of infinite, all of this eventually led to Crisis on Infinite Earths, aka the death of the ARROWVERSE as we know it, which I don't have the time or willpower to get into today. Maybe another video. We can't forget the trope of leaning on Wells and the impact of the Reverse Flash anytime the creative well ran dry, and honestly, they should just go back and retroactively give Tom Cavanaugh a raise. In later seasons, honestly, the only reason I was sticking around was to see what crazy version of Wells was gonna pop up next. Season 2 was good overall, and I thought Zoom was actually a pretty solid villain, but he was just a rehash of Thawne, someone who the Flash trusted that eventually turned out to be an evil speedster. And although I do think Zoom was a pretty menacing villain overall, it wasn't as much of an emotional draw as Wells and Thawne was. And we can't forget the old time remnant situation from this season is what sets up season 3, aka one of the most boring, uneventful, overly dramatic seasons of the entire series. Season 3. Where are the stakes? At first, I was kind of hyped for season 3, to be honest. They were doing all this talk about how they were going to lean into one of the most iconic Flash comic book runs ever, Flashpoint, which is one of my favorite DC comics and one of my favorite DC movies as well. So yeah, I was genuinely excited for this season. And it started off pretty cool. We got Wally West as the only Flash. Barry's parents were alive. That was dope to see. But I mean, it only lasted for one episode. So Barry yet again makes the same mistake of going back in time. This time he doesn't make the big boy decision. This time he makes the selfish yet understandable one and saves his mom from being killed. He gets everything he thought he always wanted, but things aren't quite the same. And without his mom being dead and his dad not being in jail, he never lived with the West and he never becomes pseudo brother and sister with Iris. So of course he can't stay in this timeline because, you know, the power of love, I guess. If he stayed in this timeline, the show would either have to end or we would have to keep Wally at the lead. So Barry turns to Thawne for help to get back to the OG timeline, of course, because he has to have Iris in his life, which means he has to let Thawne go back and kill his mom all over again. And after reliving all of that trauma, of course, the Flash learns his lesson and never does it again, right? Nope, he runs back in time again because in this timeline there's things off. Cisco's brother's dead and, you know, Iris and Joe argue sometimes. So Barry does it again and Jay Garrick had to give him a stern talking to about the ramifications of time travel. I know it's only his 3rd year at this point. He's not supposed to have everything figured out, but the Flash makes a lot of repetitive rookie mistakes throughout this show, and I really started to notice that in season 3. And it didn't help that this was yet another season season dealing with another evil speedster, yet another season trying to prevent someone's future death, yet another season where we get a different version of Wells, and yet another person in Team Flash that the writers didn't know what to do with gets powers. They literally told the same story for 3 seasons in a row, and it was just getting less and less interesting and having less and less emotional weight. Season 3 actually had a lot of potential, but it was ultimately wasted. I mean, Savitar was pretty cool at first. His intro was epic as hell, but pointless in the end. He never used all of that speed to his advantage. We just had to watch 19 or 20 episodes of him playing with his food and never actually eating it. They stretched the reveal of who Savitar was out for so long that it made it obvious it was going to be an alternate version of Barry. But with all that being said, they still had a big opportunity to make this unnecessarily drawn out season good, to make it set up some ramifications that would change the course of the show forever. They could have actually let Iris die.
I'll never let the pain and darkness determine who I am. I will never be you.
That line could have hit so much harder if they actually let her die, because that is Barry Allen from the comics. In an era where superheroes were getting darker and grittier, especially in DC, they didn't do that with Barry. They made darker and more heartbreaking and grittier things happen to him while keeping him a very hopeful character. And they really could have brought that home with this season, but nope. We get a death of one of the million Wells, which literally only one person in the show mourned over, because everybody else knew they just replaced him with another one. The Flash season 3 for me is the definition of wasted potential. Season 4, I respect the attempt, but nah. For me personally, I started to lose interest in the show around season 4. It had some interesting elements overall, and I really liked the tonal shift that they took. They made it a little more lighthearted and stopped trying to mimic the darker tone of Arrow, and I think that really worked for the Flash a lot. And I know a lot of people are hit or miss on Ralph Dibny, but I actually like his introduction. Even though we're still getting the trope of adding a random person to the team that pops up, at least he was kind of interesting and entertaining and for the most part likable, at least for me. Also, Nora being a creep for the entire season was kind of cool too. She was just popping up randomly and pretty much stalking everyone, and I had no idea who she was. A big focus this season was the bus metas, which gave the writers a side plot that actually decently connected back to the main story with the Thinker. I really liked the concept of the Thinker, especially after season 3, where we get this big physically imposing villain in Savitar, to go to the next season and we get a villain that's more cerebral than physically imposing. I thought that was really cool. Barry being framed for murder and him going to jail was a really engaging storyline, especially the underground black market metas. But like any cool story that's introduced, it gets tossed aside for something that was way less interesting. Amunet was by far the most pointless villain on the show. If last season was the epitome of wasted potential, this season was the epitome of great idea, poor execution. Seasons 5 through 7. The Fall Off. Season 5 was the first season that I didn't watch as it was being aired. I just caught up with it when it hit Netflix and binged it. And I don't think it was terrible. Like, I know a lot of people really hate this season, and I understand why. I mean, we have yet another season where the plot surrounds the future death of the Flash. And at this point, the trope just didn't hold any weight. Speaking of tropes, this is definitely where the well had ran dry on the Harrison Wells trope.
I love the Flash.
What?
Oh, you, Barry Allen, yeah, with the zoom.
Look, Tom Cavanaugh was a gem, and I love his performances as all the Wells, but it was really becoming stale for me after this season. I also found Nora to be extremely annoying. She was clearly presented to be a future CSI tech in her mid-20s, but they made her act like a gullible, kind of dumb 10-year-old. She throws temper tantrums, and she never seems to really think anything through. Her involvement with Thawne makes absolutely no sense. There's a Flash museum dedicated to him and all of his villains he's ever faced in detail. And she's clearly studied up on this quite a bit. It makes absolutely no sense why she would get involved with him. But I get it, you know, the power of love or whatever, and you know, she misses her dad, so sure. And where they really dropped the ball with Nora is they tried to make her the emotional weight of the season. I don't know why I'm supposed to care that she's dying. One, she's from a possible future. 2, she's from a possible future that we're trying to prevent. The future where the Flash is either dead or disappeared. Why would we care that a person from that timeline is going to die? That's the exact timeline we're trying to stop. And Nora's existence means that Barry and Iris know they can physically have children. So if you miss her or if you want to see her, just go have sex. You'll see her in literally like 9 months. And I mean, as for Cicada, once again, cool idea, I guess. The only interesting thing about him really is that he's one of the dudes from American Pie, and that was like my childhood. And it may have happened earlier and I just didn't catch it, but this season is where I really started to notice to defeat the villain, the Flash just sits down and has a conversation with him. And I guess cool, you want to show the kiddos you can handle problems without your fist. But I don't want to see the Flash being a therapist for villains. You gotta let him flash around and punch people in the face. This is what I mean. You can't make shows with every single audience in mind. It just does not work. Overall, Cicada was a lackluster villain, and the season in general was very lackluster as well. For the most part, I was still in tune with the show. I hadn't given up on it or anything. The show didn't officially lose me until season 6. Season 6 was just so messy, man. I couldn't even finish it. I just kept up with it through recaps. Consuming it that way was way less frustrating and honestly more entertaining than watching it. There were still way too many characters, too many people with powers. The Flash had become a background character in his own show. It got even worse with season 7. After I got all caught up with my season 6 recaps, I said, you know what? I'm gonna actually watch season 7 live. I had high hopes for Arrow season 5 like redemption, but that's not what we got at all. Even if you're a diehard fan of the show, you gotta admit season 7 was just bad. They leaned into the kid-like themes even more, and instead of taking one of the many side characters in the show they already had and fleshing them out, they started introducing even more characters. But I actually kinda like the idea of all the forces being actual people, but it was just mishandled overall, to say the least. And on top of that, they brought back the most trash evil speedster of all evil speedsters, Godspeed. The fight scenes and choreography was at an all-time low in this season. They also brought Jay Garrick back, even though in post-Crisis there's supposedly only one Earth now, so where the hell has Jay Garrick been this whole time? Crisis literally destroyed the Arrowverse in general, but since the multiverse was so heavily used in The Flash, I think it ruined this show the most. Also, Team Flash is deeper than the Avengers at this point, and for what? You literally had Wally West at your disposal for all this time, and instead of giving him a satisfying storyline, you bring back Nora and introduce Bart. First off, Barry, my guy, wear a condom. Yeah, man, I'm just not even going to deep dive into season 6 and 7. They're just unapologetically bad. Season 8, I'm good, love. Enjoy. There's been so many people that's messaged me about season 8, saying that it's like a return to form and the show's gotten so much better, you should really tune back in. I heard the season 1 showrunner is back and that's dope. I'm glad they finally decided to bring him back. Even though I'm probably not going to actually watch the season, I have kept up with the recaps through Pagey and I've noticed a few improvements. The main one being is they pulled a Teen Wolf and split the season into sections. That way they can make smaller, more focused arcs within the season instead of telling one long linear story with a bunch of filler episodes. They also shortened the season, which all I have to say to that is finally. So hats off to them for seeing something not working and making a change. Even though I can tell the writing is better, the quality is better, the camera movements have more personality, or the production overall is better. I can 100% say and agree with that, even just watching through recaps. But with that being said, I still see all the tropes and repetitiveness that took the show to its downfall in the first place. They're still leaning on the crutch of Tom Cavanaugh and Thawne. There's still a crap ton of side characters that are used for filler episodes. There's way too many power people in the mix. Barry is still going around exposing himself to everybody he meets. Not in that way, you know what I mean. Literally everyone knows his identity at this point. The future death of the Flash is still being used as a plot device. At this point, if the Flash doesn't die in season 9, this will be the longest, most unfulfilling round of foreplay I've ever experienced. So yeah, it seems to be better written and more precise than it's been in a long time, and that's cool. I'm glad that you guys still tuned into the show or enjoying it for the most part. But for me, it just seems like more of the same. Barry never really seems to leave first gear, and it's been nearly 10 years at this point. He still feels like a novice hero to me. He learns a lesson every season that he somehow forgets over and over again. There is an art to character regression, and I get that it's a powerful tool, but you can't overdo it. For me, the cool thing about heroes is even though they have all of these powers, they're just like us. They love, they laugh, they hurt, they fall, they get back up again, and sometimes they take one step forward and 2 steps back. And in times where we're uncertain if we'll ever break that cycle, we know for sure that our heroes will, so it gives us hope. Which takes me back to my question from the beginning of the video. How long is too long? Are we forever destined to see our heroes we love fizzle out over time, becoming shells of what they once were? Or will the writers adapting these heroes learn from past mistakes? Because sometimes, like our own life cycle, the hardest part for us to accept is that just like us, one day our heroes must die.